And now, without further ado, I would like to welcome our guest speaker, André Robichaud, researcher and geography professor at the University of Moncton, Shippingen campus. André has diverse experience in dendrochronology, which he uses to study the geomorphology of Canadian coasts, as well as the paleoecology of woody vegetation in wetlands. His current research focuses on photogrammetric techniques using drones to determine erosion rates, risk areas, and the resilience of natural environments in New Brunswick. Through his research, he aims to enhance short and long-term adaptation efforts to increase the resilience of coastal areas. So, welcome today. And we will now pass the mic over to André. He will put his on the screen momentarily. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jenna, for the introduction, kind words. We'll get started here very shortly. I'm going to conduct this in English, or in French rather. So if you do have questions in English, even though my presentation is in French, I'd be more than happy to answer them in English. And now I'm going to start sharing my screen with you. And Jenna, do you see the screen? Yes, we see the screen. Thank you. So the way I present things is to try and give you a perspective on the past, our history, as where how our coastlines have shifted, because the root of the presentation is how the coastlines evolve over time, and to better understand it, we have to go way back in the past. And here we see a series of images that I'm going to show you that represent the Maritimes. So you see here the New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, you've got Newfoundland, and this is about 14,000 years ago, where this is about the max of the ice shield, where you're starting to see deglaciation here. The white areas you see is the glaciers that were covering the entirety of the surface area of the Maritimes in that era. And we see the contour here of what would be the coastlines. The glaciers were actually exerting a tremendous weight onto the Earth's mantle and made it so that they were driven down with respect to the sea level. And at the same time, the sea level should have been lower because a large part of the Earth's water was stored in these large glaciers. At that era, this entire zone was depressed, where the periphery here, we had basically the Earth's crust being pushed up, where we see the Great Banks of Newfoundland. Underneath Nova Scotia, there were islands that existed over there. So I'm going to go through this rather quickly. 12,000 years ago, deglaciation had started, and we can see what the coastline was then, almost out to the coastal shelf. We have the zone here by Sable Island that was lifted up, and then we had a depressed area. And 10,000 years ago, the glaciers have disappeared. And the fact that the glaciers have disappeared, we have some of the crust has started to push upwards, and in other areas it's depressed. So if we look at Prince Edward Island, in that time, it was actually land, there was a land bridge. You can see their coastline was much further ahead. 8,000 years ago was about the maximum level of push-up. So you can see the coastline way further pronounced, much further out than it is now. Then we go to 6,000 years ago, where sea level started to rise. For the entirety of the Maritimes, we see there was a distinct movement of the Earth's crust, or the mantle. And if you look at Sable Island, it was a little bigger at that point in time. and you see the coastlines receding. And since that point, the coastlines have continued to recede, large part because you have the Earth's mantle being driven down, and it's a motion that is currently underway. We're at a place where the sea level has been rising for several thousand years in any event. The part where the water level itself, like when we speak of the sea level and the vertical movement of the Earth's crust, it also causes the coastline to either grow or recede. So when we combine the two movements together, we have a variable coastline result. They're quite possibly the most complicated areas to determine the sea level over time, but we do know now that it is rising everywhere. You can see certain areas where the depression occurs more rapidly. And in the Hudson Bay, you have a rising. Other places, you have a recession. Now, if we go into the past, historical past, and here I'm going to take an example of where I come from. And you see on this map, around 1777, we have the Northumberland Strait. Shediac would be there, Barachois, Cap Pelé here, and then we have the Tourmente Cape. And then Nova Scotia is not too far, so you've got Shediac and Moncton here on the left side of the map. I'm going to try and put the emphasis on this small little territory right here that you see. And in particular on this little area. In 1777, that is the Robichaud region. So you have Cap Pelé, Barachois, you have this formation right here. And that was a sand spit, which was a long one, not quite as large as the one in Booktush, but very close. It was quite massive. We still do see it around 1800. It's still quite visible here. We still have Barachois over here and Cap Pelé in this direction, where that still exists. And just notice that it goes over the entirety of the river right to the other end. Very important to note. From 1864, you still see it, the little finger of sand sticking out, which crosses the river, goes almost all the way across, and you have a little peninsula below it. So my grandfather, born in 1885, used to tell him about the two dunes that existed back there. Now you only see one, so this long sandbar here. So the famous two dunes that we were talked about, but we've never seen. That's I had rediscovered them luckily through these old maps. I don't have any real images from the 1900s that would have been quite useful. I'm currently looking for them. But if we go in the same area in a more recent past, let's say 1945, the sandbar here that existed in 1777, it corresponds to this zone right here that's circled in red here. So in my aerial photo, I don't have the leftmost portion there, Barachois. But here you have the leftover of the sandbar. It has reduced in size. Usually it would have gone all the way out to the where the mouse is pointing on the left. The water here was deep enough so that fishing boats could get in and out of that little miniature bay. This channel right here was formed over the course of a large storm. I'm not sure which one. It was in the early 1900s, so a channel was formed. One of my aunts and uncles had talked to me about it. We called it La Brèche, and the road that you see here we called Chemin de la Brèche, or Breach Road. So you see on the territory there are terms that have been used to name the places, basically physical features used to name the places. And again, that was in 1945. Here we find 1954. It's about the same size, the sand dune. I also have a 1931 photo, and it's the same size again. Now, if we look at 1963, Do you see the dramatic change? Look, especially where the mouse is, you see the closing up of the waterway. After the Second World War, there was a large boom of construction and they needed a lot of sand. So they started to extract sand from beaches, and that was an area where a lot of sand was extracted. Uh, we extracted from the extremities. Now, look again, 1963, 1970, 1976. So in these years, the provincial government had conducted a study to find out the state of beaches. And once the conclusions were drawn, they decided they restricted the extraction of beach sand from that point forward. So a moratorium on the extraction of sand. But by that point, it was already too late. I mean, as we can see, from 54 to 70 to 76 to 1982, and then 1996 and 2001, 2011, and this is the most recent at 2022. So it gives you an idea how coastlines can rapidly evolve. The sandbar without sand extraction would have probably stuck around. I witnessed this breach that formed in 1988. I saw the storm with my own eyes. I mean, this is from where I'm from. So I'm not only a scientist, but I'm also a resident of the region. This area here was naturally plugged, and we plugged the other end. So when this large storm happened, water ran over, and when it wanted to recede, it created a breach. And so the breach is what you see here. The breach grew, and the coastline began to recede, and it finished with the last photo of 2022. So you saw the coastline's receding. It's been happening for a long time, but there's also human activities that have perturbed or increased this mechanism. So in general, it's happening elsewhere in the world. So I took an area not too far from what I was initially showing you. So if you look at 1944, nobody on the coastline. 1982, starting. 2001, you can see much more development. And 2022, and what I wrote here was the recession of the coastline from 44 on. So you have a receding coastline naturally, and you have folks that have started to develop. And this is not only here. This is a pervasive phenomenon that takes place all over the world. Often it starts with cottages, chalets for beach access. You know, banal reasons, vacationing. People just want to seasonally go there. In the summer, it's a magnificent, beautiful area. You know, eventually the cottages start to transfer to winter, and then living winter on a coast is very hard. Acadians in that era, they didn't go to the coastline in that time because, for one, it was dangerous, and two, they had to be close to main thoroughfares, which were inland, and also the fact that they knew what a storm was. They knew how intense it can become on the coastline, and their infrastructures were really adapted to inland. Now we have folks that are coming and developing, and it's not only here, it's everywhere on the planet, where there was an increased desire to settle on the coast because it's beautiful, natural landscape, and so on. And the folks who do come develop are those with short memories. They don't have the experience of the past. Myself, I remember when I was young, my dad would tell me, you can't go swimming at a certain spot because there's currents, this and that. They knew the area. They knew how the land worked. And new folks who come, and even folks that come from not too far away, are liable to develop, and they don't know and understand the dangers, and knowing that the storms, they don't necessarily come every year. They could be 5-year intervals, 10-year intervals for these major storms. But given the climate change, we may be facing those large storms at a more frequent rate. But that's a whole other can of worms that we won't open today. Now, in France, It is an area that has been occupied for a long time, the coast, a lot of work. And there the sea line hasn't, or the coastline hasn't changed much in 5,000 years. There's even areas where there has been an accumulation of sand where the coast has actually grown. But what has happened is they've had the same movement, folks who have moved to the coastline for, non-functional reasons, and development took place between the end of the 1950s and 2010. There were very few storms. Those were relatively calm years, geologically speaking, so folks were quite confident in settling down in these areas. But in February of 2010, a huge storm called Xynthia, which was documented, which really caused a lot of devastation along a part of the coast. So this area in particular, you can see the amount of flooding that has occurred. There was 47 deaths actually in this event that had never happened before, this type of event. But these were folks that didn't have knowledge of the dangers associated to developing the coastline. They had, a very calm period for an extended period of time where this was a huge surprise for many of them. Following this, governments and local governance tried to. It was a really important moment in France's history where they started to realize the dangers of coastal development. And now the research associated to all this. One of the goals I have in my research is to try and document this type of thing so that we can at least have a good idea as to how the coast evolves. I work a lot on coastal erosion, and one of the things we do is we measure the recession by way of aerial photography. So here I'm showing you an area in the north of New Brunswick. First photos in 1944, then 55, 63, all the way to 2012. And we can see the basically constant rate of erosion here. That's speed of erosion. So here's about the same area. So we have the coastline in 2009. We can measure the rate of change of the recession, and we can extrapolate that data to predict where the coastline will be in the future. We put color coding here for erosion risks. So we're not talking about flooding here. And we also have, fragile cliff lines that are quite fragile and erode quite easily. So we're using historical data and using it to project into the future. Now, in the new research that we would like to do, we note that the erosion rates are going to accelerate, and we're trying to work on those type of things. That I'm not going to show you because this is ongoing research. So I'm conducting it with the government, and the trick is to see what we can do to adapt our scenarios to have something a little more realistic for the future. Are we going to take recent measurements, which are probably faster? Are we going to add an acceleration factor to the equation? And do there exist other methods that we could use? The other thing I'm working on that I want to show you a little bit of would be the production of the volume of sediments by way of cliff erosion. One of the large problems we have on New Brunswick's coastline is with regards to the sediments essentially come from the erosion of cliffs. Now, if we prevent that erosion, there would be less sediment in the system that will be transported along the coastline, which feeds beaches. So the works that we're trying to undertake is regarding the changes in beach volume, and that's something that was asked by certain municipalities who want to know how long are their dunes going to survive. So the studies that were conducted in the past couldn't really answer that question, but they were saying that we have to calculate the volume of the sand systems along the coastlines, the beaches, to see to what point has it evolved, because we know that the beach is receding with the increasing of the sea levels. So are we wondering, we're asking ourselves, does the actual volume of sand stay constant? Because, otherwise there wouldn't be any beaches. The sea levels have been rising for 5,000 years. And we're wondering, are these beaches going to be able to sustain themselves with the increasing rising sea levels? So I'm not going to show you all these numbers, but to show you a little bit of what we're doing, we have a sandbar here divided into sections. And all of those sections, we calculated the volume of sand. Is we flew over it with drone, created a 3D model, which is extremely precise, right down to a cubic centimeter for this type of thing, hyper precise. And we can see how it evolved. So in 2011, 2019, 2022, in general, it changes over time. So over the course of 20 years, but we notice in this zone, we've noticed a massive loss here. And that's simply because we have an opening here. So this is a migratory zone. It's a natural erosion zone. But this zone does seem to be holding up. Now I'm going to show you this, which I will finish with. So you have this zone. So here it shows you. So here you have a zone where everything that's in green or yellow hasn't changed. What's in orange has been lost in sediment. And where it's darker green, there was a gain. So this was after Fiona. So we can see the after effects of Fiona. We can see loss of sand. And here on the curve on 2020, 2023, and 2022. So Fiona really removed a large part of sand. You have where the dune has grown, and then immediately following that, sharp decline. Last thing I'm going to show you, 1971. Look down here at the circle portion. One breach has formed. You had a storm. It's changed a lot. So 1996, 2011, we don't see a thing. So the resiliency of beaches under natural conditions is really quite possible. It's a situation that can exist. Intervention, on the other hand, can perturb that. And in certain cases, it helps. Others, no. That's a whole other story. Take a whole other webinar to explain that type of thing.